All right, hello and welcome to the 2021 Southeast Kansas Local Consult Meeting. We're in and we're ready to go. I want to start by saying thank you for joining us today via Zoom. Of course, I really wish we could have been in person. That's what I think makes some of these conversations so rich and helpful. But it was most important that we get together now so that we can keep pace within the IKE program. We value your input. IKE literally is what it is today because of the input that everyone has provided to help shape the new program. We need to hear from you today so we can put some new projects into the development pipeline. But first, let's take a moment and have a greeting from Governor Kelly.
Hello, I'm Governor Laura Kelly. Thank you all for taking part in this critical effort to improve transportation in Kansas. 2 years ago, more than 2,000 Kansans participated in local consult discussions in communities large and small. Many of you were part of those discussions. In those meetings, you shared ideas to create more flexible approaches to infrastructure improvements. You challenged Kdot to become a better partner and solve more problems by eliminating harmful internal silos. We heard you loud and clear. Thanks to your time, your thoughtfulness and collaborative spirit, today we have the Eisenhower Legacy Transportation Program, more commonly known as IKE. I signed this landmark 10-year program into law last year after it passed through the legislature with strong bipartisan support. Through IKE, we more than doubled transportation investments from 2018 to fiscal year 22. That's over $1 billion more for projects, for Kansas highways and bridges, for broadband infrastructure, for aviation, public transit, and for biking and walking paths. These investments are making transportation safer. They're strengthening critical infrastructure, creating jobs, and delivering more economic opportunities for our state. My administration is committed to keeping up this momentum. Earlier this summer, we announced nearly $1 billion worth of highway projects moving to the construction pipeline. As promised, we'll deliver one phase of the remaining T-Works projects to construction by the end of this year. And, true to my word, we are on track to close the aptly named Bank of Kdot by fiscal year 23. We're making sure that transportation dollars are used for transportation projects. Again, thank you for participating in the local consult process. Your input shapes the next 8 years of the IKE program, and we'll make sure we deliver the quality transportation system Kansans need. Take care.
So today, once again, we're putting the IKE principles into practice. Partnerships are the corner or the bedrock of the Eisenhower Legacy Transportation Program. We work together, public and private sector, to solve more problems. And one of the best ways to do that is by having more options to discuss and to solve problems. And as you'll see later today as we look at the project list, we have more options for Southeast Kansas to consider. So specifically, why are we here today? It's to replenish the IKE rolling program. Remember, every 2 years, we come together in local consult to identify new projects to put into the development pipeline, and then we pull projects out for construction based on available revenues. This year, also, we want to prepare for a possible Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act program, which Congress is currently considering. If that legislation is passed, additional highway and bridge funds will be made available to Kansas. While we don't know exactly what that fund level will be, we're watching it carefully. We're also watching inflation carefully. What we do know, absolutely, is that we are always better off if we're prepared to take full advantage of any additional dollars. Therefore, as we work our way across the state, we want your input on new highway expansion and modernization projects to put into the development pipeline. We are going to have a pretty big range this time. $600 to $750 million needs to go into the development pipeline. Now, that's a statewide number. That is not exclusively a Southeast Kansas number. So let's pause for just a minute and consider really where we are in this process. This is the first time we will have had a local consult meeting under the new rolling program, under the IKE program. IKE was designed to be much more dynamic, and there are some implications because of that. That means, as you see number 2, we have project lists and scores, and we have updated information for you to consider. We're going to bring you along, we're going to show you the math, so to speak, as we refine our methodology. We have more sensitive analysis, and we want to hear your thoughts about projects that maybe drop out of consideration, that we want to bring back into consideration. The very guts of Ike, it's so that we can respond to emerging opportunities, to new things that are happening in your district, and the only way that happens is if we have a dynamic project list. Because of the greater flexibility built into Ike, that comes with the responsibility of greater transparency. You see at the bottom of your screen the Ike website. We have loads of information there, and I encourage you to take a look at it if you have any questions about the Ike program. Okay, in terms of the agenda today, we've got some quick survey results to review. Then, as per usual, we're going to look at project lists, scopes, and information, maybe more than you ever thought you needed, about projects. We'll go into Zoom room breakout discussions. Now, typically, that's when we would have gone into breakouts. This time it will be electronic. When we come back together, I'll talk about some new Kdot initiatives. We'll take a little break, and then we'll reconvene to hear about those breakout discussions. I'd be the first to say, there's nothing ideal about COVID. Nobody thinks there is. There's nothing ideal about meeting remotely. But I promise you, we are doing the best we can to gather your input so we can make better informed decisions. So we started, you might remember earlier this summer, we reached out and said, hey, let us know what your thoughts are around larger issues, bigger priorities, not project-specific sorts of stuff. I was thrilled. We heard from 2,000 Kansans from across the state who responded to a survey, and from Southeast Kansas, we heard from 150 folks. You shared with us your priorities. Your top priority, and not surprising as it has usually been the case in Southeast Kansas, 30% of you said your top priority is safety. 17% said economic development, 15% identified broadband internet access, and 12% on preservation. When you dig into that a little more deeply, when you compare District 4, which is the Southeast Kansas district, against statewide, you see generally District 4 rated or said safety is improving a bit, but it's still, it's better than statewide average numbers, but still not good enough. Here are some of your comments as they relate to safety. We need people-focused improvements. You need to think about where we have oversized loads. I'm familiar with those concerns. Think about our specific regional conditions, including farm equipment and narrow and more hilly roads. So as you have your project discussions, thinking about the safety implications would be very helpful. You also said economic development is very important in Southeast Kansas. You've said that in terms of how development in your area is changing, you said it's about the same. And access to opportunities, which means access to jobs and education opportunities, slightly lag the rest of the state. Now, while you did not identify biking, pedestrian, public transportation as one of your top priorities, I can tell you I know it is important to quality of life, and so I wanted to make sure that we review these results too. And certainly you said better public transit is needed, better options for those who walk and bike. We know that we need public transportation to be more reliable and affordable. And then the one at the bottom where we say we're lacking in sidewalks, bike paths, and bike lanes. We know all of those features come together to provide a higher quality of life for citizens in your area. All right. So as Governor Kelly mentioned, as we went through 2019 and built the Ike program, we heard from more than 2,000 Kansans. So thank you for joining us again today. The new Ike program is about $9.9 billion over 10 years. It's designed to strengthen infrastructure and provide more economic growth opportunities. Now, $5 billion, about half of the program, is targeted to preservation, making sure our system stays in good condition. Makes sense. Our highway system is worth more than $30 billion. It's one of the state's most valuable assets, so we need to take good care of it. In addition, we've identified about $2.3 billion for modernization and expansion projects. So that's the piece that we're talking about today. In terms of Southeast Kansas more specifically, we've identified a minimum investment of $100 million for modernization and expansion. When you look across the entire state, we've identified a minimum of $1.1 billion. but I said we were going to put $2.3 billion into modernization and expansion. That's right. We guarantee these minimums. We know we're going to invest up to $2.3 billion. With IIJA, perhaps more than that. What we've got there, that gap or that difference, represents the flexibility I've been talking about. So that's why we're here to talk with you today. We've identified $51 million, 6 construction projects, so that gets you about halfway to your minimum. And we've got one more project in the development pipeline. We want to make sure we're putting more projects into the development pipeline that actually exceed the $2.3 billion over time, so that we always have a robust pipeline, a well-developed pipeline to pull projects from. All right, so if you think back to last summer, actually it was in May, we identified $1.6 billion worth of projects to put into the development pipeline. Okay, got the development pipeline, that's the first piece. This summer, we announced about $750 million coming out of the development pipeline to go to construction. That means we have $824 million left in development, so now we want to put $600 to $750 million back into the development pipeline. Next summer, we'll pull some more out for construction based on what our revenues look like. Therefore, you have this rolling program. Projects come in, we pull them out for construction. We then identify more projects. That's the rolling nature. One of the advantages of this that we haven't talked much about is that at the end of IKE, at 2030, we will have a full pipeline so that we can continue to pull projects out, so that we never again have to say, wow, we've got hardly anything on the shelf. We want to make sure Kansans have full benefits from transportation investments. So, using the IKE principles, we'll replenish the development pipeline. In partnership, we'll hold local consult more often. You'll see in just a minute, we're bringing more options to solve problems. We've got new projects to discuss and more project scopes to discuss. We're using updated data and better information, and we want to share that with you. Of course, it wouldn't be a meeting if we didn't have lots of good information and lots of details to share. The two most important pieces, the project lists are identified there, are shown with the red outlines. And this is a screenshot of those. So we have two lists. We have a modernization list and an expansion list. I'm going to review what's the same from 2019 and then share with you what's new in 2021. What's the same? First, overall, the scoring process is exactly the same. We have the same project category types, the same factors and overall weights. Just like last time, and actually dating back to TWorks, we'll provide draft engineering and economic scores to discuss. Then we want to hear your thoughts. We want your input to create that local consult score to help inform the regional priority score. It's important, and for those who are really technically focused, sometimes this part is kind of hard to wrap your mind around. Scoring helps us compare projects equally or fairly because they're relative to each other. But I'd be the first to tell you that I doubt any one score is precisely right or accurate. That's why we come to you. We want you to help us. We want you to inform some of those decisions. But in a relative sense, because we've used the same methodology, in a relative sense, it's very helpful. All right, so let's spend just a minute. I said the same project types: preservation, modernization, expansion. Preservation's grayed out on your screen because we use engineering factors to select those projects. Those are things like overlays, reconstruction, striping, bridge repair, bridge replacement. Now on the modernization piece, that's where we take what we have and we make it a little better, a little more modern. Add shoulders, flatten hills, straighten curves, improve intersections. We use 80% of engineering data to make that selection, and 20% comes from your input. Now on the expansion side, that's things like add lanes and interchanges and passing lanes. In that group, we rely 50% on engineering data, 25% on local input, and 25% on economic analysis. As per usual, we evaluate rural and urban projects separately on economic analysis. Okay, now modernization scoring, we have the engineering factors, things like geometrics and safety and capacity and pavement. Other factors, we look at route continuity and previous investments. So the way I look at it is we have a segment analysis, that's the engineering. The other factors make sure we're taking a systems view. We can't just build 8 miles in isolation from things that are going on the other side of the 8 miles, on either side of the 8 miles. So we take the system view into account. Likewise, on the expansion side of things, because remember, expansion is adding something that isn't there, we look at current and future projected congestion, truck traffic, and safety. This is where we also look at economic analysis, and we continue to look at the route continuity and previous investments to make sure we're getting the most we can out of previous dollars spent. So as I said, we've improved, we've updated or modified our scoring methodology. First, we now, for expansion, look at both crash rate and crash frequency, not just rate. And the reason we do that is to make sure that we aren't overvaluing one big accident that happened in one location, and we're balancing it with, if we have lots of small accidents in more frequent but less damage, so to speak, it's a more balanced approach. Now the next one, and I'm obviously using like layman's language here, the way to explain this point threshold business is as everything improves, pavement quality improves, congestion starts to decrease, you want your system to get better. Well, it's sort of like you raise the curve in your class. You can't have every project scoring 100 or there's no differentiation. So what we're doing here is we are raising the threshold. It's getting harder to get an A, it's getting harder to get that perfect engineering score. Now again, because everything's relative, it works in concert across, but we are having a more sensitive analysis. And then we've updated economic scoring, and I'll talk about that. So you'll recall in T-Works 2008, 9, and 10, we introduced economic analysis. We were also coming out of the Great Recession. So we weighted job creation highly. 10 years later, things are different, right? In 2019, we continue to think about gross regional product, but we also want to value people's time. We want Kansas to be a great place to work and live. So in 2019, we modified the way we look at economics. 50% of the score is gross regional product and time savings, divided by cost, and then the other 50% of the score are those two things added together. Now, incrementally, we take a step forward, and now we value money. We take money more into consideration. So now we add the two benefits together and divide by cost. Again, it's sort of a more finely tuned view. We're taking cost into consideration. So as you look at these projects lists, as I said earlier, 2 years later, scores have been updated. First, we have updated data, and you can see there on the slide the source year for our new information. We also had time in the last 2 years to get out and take a look at where we have talked about passing lanes so that we could do some field verification to make sure that locations we had identified could really work in the real world. It's one thing to sit here at Docking or in other places, Eisenhower, and you try to figure out where could we locate something. Getting people out in the field, you will see, has served us well to get better specific locations. We also have better, more refined information on cost estimates. Again, this is a more real-world view. It is not an added inflation factor. It's simply better understanding the conditions in the field. As we said, the scoring methodology now has been updated to reflect feedback, including making sure that we're adequately considering truck traffic. And we've brought some new projects to the list, both based on district staff suggestions as well as from stakeholder input. All right, so this is the show your math kind of moment. So we started out in 2019, and we had the 2019 list of projects. So first bucket, some of those projects were identified and moved into the development or the construction pipeline. We don't need to discuss those any longer. So now we have the list from 2019 coming down to local consult. We will talk about those. We also have bucket number 3, new projects and new scopes have been added to the discussion. So you have a new set of projects to discuss. Some old, some new. Likewise, and we'll talk a bit about this, some projects we didn't score. Doesn't mean they're gone, doesn't mean they're off our radar. It just means we didn't score them again because we put new projects in. We'll talk a bit more about that. But those are the 4 buckets that we have to talk about, and I'm going to walk you through those. Now, 2 years from now, Maybe I won't go into this amount of detail, but again, this is the first time that we've had a local consult meeting in a rolling program. All right, because you always want to start with the easiest first. For those that are under the orange banner on your handouts, those went into the development or construction pipeline. Well done, Maggie. Orange is a perfect color for those banners. So don't worry about those guys. All right, as I said, buckets 2 and 3. Previous projects remain, and we have some new ones. We have 11 previous projects and 7 new in italics. Note, the new projects are in italics for a sum of 18 projects that I suspect will take the bulk of your time, but they don't have to be the only things you discuss at all. And now, we also have a list of projects in the grayed out banner of projects that we didn't score. Again, they're not gone, we just didn't score them. So, good example, the first one is US 69 Cherokee County. Because in KDOT's view, on US 69, we would build from north to south. This is the last piece of that 4-lane that would connect us to Oklahoma. We didn't score that one again because we had other projects to score. You tell us if you think we ought to be working from south to north. Totally open to that discussion. In fact, this might serve as a good way to spark some discussion. Now, there are some, like US 75 Montgomery County, this next one, US 160 to north of Independence. That's where that field verification came into play. That specific location isn't feasible. Doesn't mean we're not going to do passing lanes on US 75, doesn't mean we don't want to discuss it. Just means that one is not very feasible, and there's no reason to continue to carry that forward in that specific location. You can see several of those. Okay, let's see what else is on our list here. Oh, okay, let's talk a bit about the Miami County one. Down there at the bottom, it says TBD Miami County Outer Loop. Is that important? Sure. It's $1 billion. I'm going to be super honest. It is something that may or may not make it into the back end of this program. We should take a look at it. We should update that information. It's not likely to make it into the pipeline this year. We could bring it back in 23, 25. Remember how I talked about making sure we want to have a full viable pipeline at the end of the program? So let's hear your thoughts about whether that's one that needs to be bumped up sooner or if it's something that sort of could come into the back end of this program or the first of the next program. As you look further down, you see US 75 in Coffee County. Good news, we took a hard look at that one and we decided ought to move that into Preservation Plus. It's a better candidate there instead of in Modernization and Expansion. The K47 in Wilson County had a low previous score. Talk to us about that if you have questions or concerns about that one. Now, I want to share quickly a story with you about these projects. As I looked at these and talked with Mark and Pete and others, it reminded me of a presentation I was at a couple of years ago at a conference when Pennsylvania DOT got up, and they talked about some of their lessons learned from some of their highway programs, and they said, you know what we've learned? Money matters. And I thought, well, yeah, it does. And I'm surprised. Anyway, I was kind of like, well, yeah, of course it does. What Pennsylvania DOT had done, because they had a rolling program, is they allowed project lists to grow year after year after year, and they were carrying billions and billions of dollars of projects because they simply didn't want to say, some are kind of rising to the top and some aren't. And I want to be as honest and transparent. I want this program to be very transparent. That's why we're bringing new ideas to you, and we're saying, like, some places this isn't feasible. Sometimes we think this project might be better served to be scored later in the program. We are not trying to heavy-handedly move stuff around. Please tell us what your thoughts are, but we are coming to you in transparency to help you understand the evolving nature, really the dynamic nature, and the implications of what a rolling program is going to look like. So in summary, 7 projects from the Southeast moved into the development or construction pipeline, and we added 7 new ones from the priority formula or district feedback. 11 projects weren't scored this year. 6 projects have a refined or changed scope, including the US 69 Crawford County corridor, and that was based on local input that suggested we sort of identify those segments, have the boundaries be a little different. We also went back and took a hard look again through field verification, and in some places, instead of just adding a shoulder, we said, Well, while we're out there, let's not just add a shoulder. Let's go ahead and get into the lane of traffic, and let's go ahead and improve that surface, rebuild some. So it's actually, you'll see, the cost estimates went up, but it's because we're doing more work, and we're doing more work in a more efficient, effective sort of way. And then in other places, like with the Fort Scott bypass, we actually have better cost estimates 2 years later because we had a little more time to put these together. Remember last year when we identified these projects in May, we'd had something like about 8 weeks to get those lists out. All right, and because, and I'll say this every single time because it's so true, there is no formula and there is no score that's perfect. And so scoring and programming, just because you have a high score or you have a low score doesn't mean you are or aren't in the program. Because we're building a team of projects. So sometimes you are going to have the highest score and you cost $10 and you're in. But sometimes projects 2, 3, and 4 that are $3 million, $3 million, and $4 million are a better deal than the $10 million one. So you can see how we have to sort of balance geography and costs and condition. So I don't want you to get too wrapped up in scores. They are important. So is your input. Okay, so no, scoring doesn't necessarily equal programming. So we're about ready to go into our breakout groups, our virtual breakout groups. What we'd like to know is what's new, what's changed in your region that we don't know about. We'd also like for you to consider in context the survey results, take a look at the new projects that have been added to the list, and think about where scopes have changed. What we really need to understand, what are your project priorities for the development pipeline? This is important for a couple of reasons. First, we're putting half or less into the development pipeline from last time. We put $1.6 billion in last year into the development pipeline. Now we're coming back and we're going to put between $600 and $750 million in. So we need to know what's of highest priority to you. Also, let us know if you have a different view of the way that we should phase a project, a different kind of scope, so that we can address your problems, but we're open to thinking about that in a different sort of way. So we want you to just hang on for a minute. I don't know how it works, but through some sort of magic, you'll be automatically transferred into virtual breakout groups. If you have a problem, that happens with technology, in your chat box, let us know if, I don't know, something goes wrong, let us know, and we will help figure out how to fix that for you. I'm looking at perfect timing. Okay, 30-minute conversation, then a 5-minute break. We've all learned through Zoom. Everybody deserves a break. We'll come back at 2:35 for a quick review of new initiatives, and then we'll have a report out. And sincerely, thank you all for being here today. Local consult only works if you're here, and I really appreciate you being here. I only wish we could be with you. And with that, let's see how this thing works. All right, welcome back. I'm glad to see we still have 120 participants. That's an outstanding stay-in rate. So thank you all for being here. As I said, we'll do a quick tour of some of the new Kdot initiatives, and let's point out with the new programs that were initiated in 2020, from cost share to innovative tech to reinstatement of some previous programs like Local Bridge. I have a special thank you to the Kdot crew and a shout out. Couldn't be prouder of that group for getting all these programs started in 2020 despite COVID. So thanks to the Kdot group and also to the local communities. Cost share is a great example of working at both the state and local level to really move projects forward for Kansans. Okay, all right, so now I want to talk for just a moment about as we look to the federal sector, we have to think about not just, state dollars, but what can we do to better leverage our ability to secure federal dollars? And what's kind of that sweet spot for finding improvements in long-term economic opportunities for Kansas? So how do we get to our existing state priorities, create opportunities for growth in Kansas, and secure additional funding priorities? And really under the Biden administration, there are two issues that are really kind of coming to the fore along with the traditional values of economic development and jobs, equity is now getting a lot of conversation at the national level. And when I'm at conferences or talking with federal officials, I try to say, like, look, let's think about equity on lots of dimensions, including rural equity and health equity. And so in this case, this is a good example that shows, in terms of rural equity, when you take a look at health outcomes, education outcomes, income outcomes, and you think about the rural sector, we need to make sure that both rural and urban regions are competing well for federal dollars. And I've been pushing hard to make sure that rural parts of Kansas, rural parts of America, quite frankly, are included in that view of equity. Likewise, there's a lot of conversation around extreme weather. You know, just last week, as we watched Louisiana, Hurricane Ida, then make its way up to the Northeast, we have to be concerned as we think about extreme weather and how we manage those extreme weather events. Certainly under the Biden administration, there's a conversation about reducing greenhouse gas emissions. When you take a look at the United States and you combine ag and transportation, you see that that accounts for about 38% of greenhouse gas emissions. In Kansas, though, because we're an a heavily ag state, transportation is also important. You see 53% of those two sectors combined create greenhouse gas emissions. So what are some things that we can do to address greenhouse gas emissions from a federal perspective? So KDOT is launching HOME, Heartland Opportunities, Markets, and Environment. It's a pilot project. As we, through Preservation Plus, go out and start to run fiber optic cables as part of Preservation Plus, so along our priority freight corridors, something we need to do to enable better communication between infrastructure and trucks. We're offering an opportunity to sort of tee off that main line and get to farms if they want to participate in a pilot program for carbon trading. It's a way to diversify their crops, and it also provides for better soil management and water conservation. Again, it's a pilot program, entirely an opt-in sort of thing, but I think it's important that we start looking at new markets and maybe change the way we talk about some of our projects at the federal level so that we can compete and bring home a good, healthy share of federal dollars where it makes sense. And now let's talk a little bit about electric vehicles. And we see under the IIJA program, additional funds for charging stations. But I got to tell you, regardless of what's happening on the public side, we've already seen the private sector respond. We heard during the Super Bowl, for example, that trucks, regular sized trucks, passenger trucks, are going to be EV enabled, and GM plans to phase out gas and diesel cars by 2035. Well, there may be some upsides to that, and there are some challenges too, particularly as it relates to motor fuels tax revenue for transportation. I'm pleased to say that in 2019, we were able, working with the legislature, we had great bipartisan support on this, we were able to implement a registration fee, $50 for hybrids and $100 for electric vehicles. Last year, so in 2019, we don't have the 2020 data, we had about 13,000 vehicles that were hybrid and about 3,000 electric vehicles. I fully anticipate that those numbers continue to rise. So what you see here on this screen is really kind of the source of my concern, I would say. When you look at motor fuels tax at 19% and 22% state and local respectively, that makes up 41% of our revenue, money that's available to Kansas transportation. But you don't have to look too far out, 2045, and you see motor fuels tax, state and federal, make up about 25% of our revenue. What is super concerning is that 60% of sales tax. I got to tell you, that's not a sustainable amount of sales tax to be coming in for our revenue stream. So we frankly have to think about something. We have to start thinking about new or different revenue sources. One possible approach that's being discussed at the federal level is to move from paying at the pump, a gas tax, to looking at a vehicle miles traveled or a usage charge. We worked to put together a grant application, and this spring we were notified by FHWA that Kansas has received a grant to do a study. And I want to be super clear, it is an opt-in study. It is only a study, but it's a chance for us to initiate a conversation in the Midwest. Currently, there has not been a Midwest perspective at the national table to talk about new or emerging revenue sources. And if we don't weigh in, the coasts are going to tell us how we're going to get our money. So I want to make sure that we have a healthy voice at the table. In terms of a Midwest perspective, we want to make sure that rural communities have a voice, that the ag industry has a voice, and commercial trucking has a voice at the table. It's a three-phase process. We have started some outreach that will continue through the end of October, and then we'll start to design the study itself. And I want to be clear again, it's opt-in. No one is going to be tracked. You opt in as to the kind of technology you want to use, or if you just want to use old paper and pen, that's fine too. It's going to be based on the way you want to participate. We welcome Kansans, lots of chambers of commerce. Some contractors have already said they're interested in participating so they can understand their fleet usage. So we welcome those, but we'll welcome anybody who wants to participate in the country, quite frankly. And Minnesota DOT has already offered and asked to participate with us. I anticipate, for example, both on the Missouri side and the Oklahoma side, some of the border communities have also indicated that they want to participate. So we'll design a pilot program, and then we'll test it, and we anticipate the conclusion by 2023. So it's a long, from my perspective, it's a long kind of conversation, but we're going to do it in a real methodical, systematic way so that we can have lots of voices at the table and provide lots of assurance that it's just a conversation. But quite frankly, if we don't have the conversation, I have concerns that we're going to get told what to do. If you're interested in participating and signing up, please reach out to Joel Skelly. You can see his phone number and his email address there. We will start an outreach effort, and that will include reaching out to stakeholders via the regular constant contact method, the newsletters that we typically send out. I just wanted you all to hear it from me that this is totally voluntary and nobody's being tracked. And then I'd like to tee up another opportunity to start talking more about IIJA and what that might mean for Kansas, and quite frankly, for the 10 MASTO states. Those are the 10 interior states, kind of the upper Midwest or upper heartland. Kdot is working in concert with Kansas Department of Ag to start thinking about what does the future of transportation look like? What's the intersection of transportation, ag, and technology? We're going to bring together public and private sector leaders with two particular sessions to think about how can we drive down the cost of transporting ag products? How can we expand economic opportunities, diversify crops, and improve soil health? That's the first conversation on October 15th. It will be a virtual event, although the panelists we are asking to participate in studio, so it can be more of a conversation instead of just talking heads. That happens in October, and then we'll outline thoughts and ideas, possible pilot programs, come back together, hopefully in person, in January or February, to start to put ink to paper and put some grant applications together and move forward with some new ideas as we look to the future of transportation. All right, so with that, that's a quick view of what we've seen with some of the new Kdot initiatives. I'm going to ask Lisa to share her screen, and we're going to get to the project report out. Okay, and it looks like we're going to start with expansion. Also, I'm thankful that we're starting in Southeast Kansas. I know you all are a hard group that will provide some grace as we all kind of figure this out for the first time. So there's nothing ideal about this whole situation, but thank you all for your patience and your grace. And I'm going to say, Lisa, can you make that just a little bit larger, please? Please, thank you. Even my glasses, I can't. Yeah. All right. So clearly we see a bunch of stars, and that's related to project. Lisa, let's make that even bigger. I think you can do it a little bit bigger, okay?
Give me one moment.
Maggie's like, no, Julie, it's not that easy. But I have a lot of faith. Okay, so it's project 478. Okay, US 69 Crawford County. All right, so as we look at that project, all right, 478. Okay, it's 17 miles at $191 million. Does anybody where it was ranked high? Let's start with, I suspect, hey, Corey, was that a project that your group ranked highly? And you want to tell me a little bit about why it's important?
Yeah, it was one I believe is either a high or a medium priority for us, and a lot of it was due to truck traffic and being able to get through that corridor in a much more safe manner. And then it also aligns with other existing priorities in the region.
Okay, all right, so I heard truck traffic for sure, and it's continuity, I'm quite sure, of that corridor. All right, who else? Go ahead, another facilitator, hop in and talk about why is this Calvin, why is this one of the top rated projects?
Secretary, we heard very strongly from Drew, who is with Via Christi, that there's a lot of medical traffic going between Fort Scott and Pittsburgh, and this would help kind of develop that line it would help better pass that traffic through. I think there's recently maybe the hospital in Fort Scott has closed down, and so there's just a lot more medical traffic coming from north on US 69.
Okay, I appreciate understanding a closure that's part of the reason that we do these conversations, is to understand how conditions are changing on the ground so we can be responsive to that. Any of the other facilitators want to speak to 478?
Secretary, this is Joel Skelly. So our group, we had 478 and 477, but specifically to 478, the thought about economic development and the continued population growth in the Pittsburgh area that really is driving the interest and the need for that expansion project there. They're one of the areas in Southeast Kansas that continues to grow and thrive, and they want to help build on that.
Joel, thank you. I was able to pop into a couple of breakout groups, and I did hear Crawford County is projected to grow. And I recall someone talking a bit about not just the projected growth, population growth, but also the idea of thinking about hub cities, like how we connect some of our hub communities or hub cities. So that's certainly, from a regional perspective, something to take into consideration, I would say. Let's bounce down and take a look at, so I think this is interesting. Representative Prill, I know that you were a part of one of the breakout groups, but here's what I find interesting. And I would also say, like, a shout out to practicality. So let's look at 422 versus 422P. So in this case, you can see the difference between a 4-lane expressway and passing lanes, and the cost difference between 49 million and 7 million. And I see a preponderance of highly rated of the stars as opposed to sort of that second tier arrow. Could anyone, maybe any of the facilitators, speak to kind of the difference or the conversation that happened in a comparison between passing lanes and a 4-lane?
Secretary Loridz, this is Chris Herrick. We had this discussion. We didn't have anybody speak to the passing lanes, but what we did have people speak to was the 4-lane expressway, and they said that it was hard to attract industry without having a 4-lane facility.
True enough. Okay. I do understand that. As I understand, like site selection, certainly transportation one, so is workforce. So I understand the interplay of those. What about, let's take a look at 169 Montgomery County. It was highly rated as well, though no secondary arrows. Any conversation around 442?
Secretary, we did hear from the city of Coffeyville. Mark had mentioned that they thought actually passing lanes were more realistic than the 4-lane expressway. Just understanding that they thought cost and time would be two important factors to consider for that 4-lane expressway. Okay,
thank you. Thanks, Ann. And I do see that on here. Other comments around?
Secretary, this is Jim Kelly on 442. And
yes,
I just wanted to mention, we talked about it in our breakout group, but the 169, 160 junction, there's a couple of development activities that we're working on in Montgomery County that would fall along that area, particularly going to the south and to the north, that would increase truck traffic tremendously in that area. So we had talked about passing lanes in that area also, because it'd be more feasible and more economical to do them. But that is a corridor that traffic could pick up substantially if even one of these projects falls into place.
I appreciate that. And the truck traffic piece is, I appreciate that, and truck traffic is something that we do need to be particularly mindful of from a safety perspective and also from a commerce perspective. Thank you.
And we also, one other thing I'll toss in on that 169 going south, we did talk about a turning lane at Liberty, which is a kind of a dangerous area. And then we also talked about continuing on down through Coffeyville, some of the bridge work that one bridge needs to come out, another one raised in order to facilitate traffic on down to the Port of Catoosa easier on 169.
Gotcha. And that's another important point. So you'll recall earlier in the presentation when I talked about having a systems perspective, kind of does us no good to improve just one segment if you create a problem or a bottleneck in the next portion. And certainly bridge raisings are important. I'm glad Calvin's on the phone because he's I wouldn't say a former bridge engineer, I guess he still is, but we know that bridges are an important linkage point as well. So I'm glad, Calvin, that I'm sure you're taking notes as well. All right. What about, it does seem to me a preponderance, 478 seems to rate out more highly than 477. Did anybody seem to think, and 411, did anybody seem to think that 477, were any of the conversations indicating 477 as a higher priority than 478? Okay. That suggests, Joel?
So yes, Madam Secretary, actually our group did lean towards 477 being a higher priority. We did not get into the specifics as to why that portion of the bypass was more important than 478, other than to say that it was numbered first, because both were mentioned as being essentially high priority.
Okay, thank you. All right, well, I feel good about the conversation we've had, but would any of the facilitators like to weigh in any further before we go on to modernization?
Secretary Lorenz, this is Chris, and I would just, as a real fast side note, I would say that in our group, 478 was the highest priority, and then as you go up, so 477 was the second highest priority, third, and then 411 was the third highest, and then 415 was the fourth highest. So as you go up the sheet, the priority goes down. So 478 is the highest priority. They're all important, but 478 is the highest priority.
Sure, and that's it, Chris. That's exactly what we're going for. Is not to say that any project's not important. It's just to get a sense of which projects are most important as just a practical matter. Any conversation around 415 before we bounce over to modernization? The Fort Scott bypass.
Yeah, Madam Secretary, this is Matt Messina. Our group did discuss this and list it as a priority project as well. However, there was some concern and desire for further investigation into any economic impact that could have negatively on the core of Fort Scott.
Okay, thank you. Okay, other comments relative to 415?
Yeah, Secretary Lorenz, this is Chris again. On 415, Mr. Brock said that he thought, as far as the US 69 projects go, that Fort Scott is the bottleneck. Not necessarily the highest priority, but a bottleneck on US 69.
Okay, all right.
So
Did any other groups talk about Fort Scott as the bottleneck on that corridor?
Yes, this is Matt Messina again. We did have some conversation about re-investigating maybe that congestion scoring for it currently and in the future related to people having experience with existing issues.
Perfect. And Matt, that's exactly the sort of thing where, I mean, we're exactly looking for, like, this feels like a bottleneck. We're not so sure about that score. That is one of the beauties of the Ike rolling program, is we have an opportunity to go back and take a look at scores. We will go back where people raise concerns. We'll take a look at those before we move forward into announcing new projects by the end of this year. So thank you. And rest assured, facilitators, we have debriefs after each of these meetings so that we can capture in more detail comments. I'll do a better job tomorrow of encouraging people to use the chat box. I mean, I would say I've already learned a couple of things from today's session, and I appreciate that. All right, let's move on to, if there are no further comments on expansion, and we'll go to modernization. Poor Lisa, I'm going to be like, all right, Lisa, make it bigger, make it bigger, make it bigger right now. Perfect. Way to go. Okay, so when you look at this, I think it's also interesting to take a look at which of these projects are italicized, meaning they're new projects, and which are ones that had already, that we brought over from previous discussions. Wow, pretty far and away, 472 looks to be a pretty important project. Maybe we start with Rachel this time. And Rachel, you want to tell us about some of the conversation your group had?
Absolutely. Thanks, Secretary. This project kind of rose to the top for our group because of the volume. And that was a lot of the discussion kind of, discussed not only the volume in this area, but all the volume that comes along with it that, might trickle out to different areas after passing through this area. And then in general, there was some discussion, being practical Kansans, there was discussion about how adding shoulders is, a really good way to use your money, and it kind of helps you spread that money out across multiple projects.
Good, Rachel, thank you. Other comments related to 472?
Madam Secretary, Rich Braille.
Yes.
That particular project is high on my priority list. Again, it has no shoulders. It's the drop-offs are pretty steep, and there is a tremendous amount of local truck traffic coming into the co-ops, and there's a rather large, for our area, a rather large high school that brings students in each and every day, and they're going both ways to school and back home, and it's just very dangerous, and it's a safety factor.
Thank you, Representative Prell. And we've been saying this since back in the T-Works days when we first started scoring local consult, and we talked, that's specifically an example we've talked about before, which is if a score, an engineering score was the same on two projects, and you go out and you talk to community and they say, hey, look, we got a school here, we need to have a better situation for our students. Of course, that one gets a bump, but we don't know that just sitting here in Eisenhower. That's why we have to get out and have conversations, and we appreciate those kinds of conversations. Gives more context to the discussion. So thank you, Representative Pearl. Those are exactly the kinds of things we're trying to understand. Or a hospital is closed and it makes another route even more important for medical access. So, man, thank you all for being here and for hanging in with us. This is what we're trying to accomplish. God knows it's harder remotely, but I appreciate the conversation. Anything else related to 472? Ken Brock, I see you like rubbing your forehead. Oh, you okay? Hanging in there?
Madam Secretary, this is Michelle Needham.
Yes.
Our group also scored 472 highly, talking about as an option to get traffic off of 400 a little bit. And then we also had someone that had a concern about minimizing traffic on 400 because that would affect their traffic counts. So it's kind of a balanced response.
Thank you. Thanks, Michelle. I appreciate that. Right. And balancing out traffic too. Anything around 471, anyone? Because that clearly, I would say it's it's nearly based on, remember, this is all sort of very qualitative, but clearly it's important too. It's sort of the second ranked project. Anyone want to speak to 471? Facilitators?
Secretary Lorenz, this is Chris Herrick, and I would just like to go back to 472 and say an additional thing that I didn't hear was the wide farm equipment. So I just wanted to bring that up. And we had 472 and 471 ranked as high priority for the same reasons, truck traffic, no shoulders, narrow roads, safety concerns.
Got you, Chris. Thank you. Thank you. All right. Let's bounce up to 473 on K47 Neosho County. Conversation around that project.
Secretary, this is Calvin. This was brought up as a high priority for our breakout group, just mostly to provide the continuity of K47. There's a small stretch there that has not been modernized, and it makes a lot of sense to modernize that so we have continuity of that route.
Gotcha. Thank you, Calvin.
Madam Secretary, I might build on what Calvin said a little bit, in the fact that this is an important east-west corridor for folks in that area heading into possibly Wichita. And so lots of folks look interested in trying to find ways to advance safety there.
Okay. Thank you, Joel. All right. Any facilitators that I haven't heard from, because I want to make sure that groups have an opportunity to be heard. So any facilitators I haven't heard from, does anybody want to weigh in? Anyone?
And this is Matt Messina again. I'd just like to share that our group had some discussion about having trust and faith in the formula that was produced by Kdot to come up with these scores, and kind of put their highest priorities at the highest score for pavement conditions primarily, and
Okay.
medium coming in for safety, the highest scorings for safety.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Matt.
Madam Secretary, this is Jenny Kramer, and our
Yes.
group elevated 485, 471, 472, and 43, and all really for the same reason. They're dangerous roads. They need shoulders, especially with the last three basically lacking shoulders, makes it dangerous.
Okay, thanks, Jenny.
Secretary. Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
Secretary, this is Anne, and I just wanted to share with you that we heard from the City of Independence, and they were very happy that the US 75 Coffee County in the box that's underneath the projects presented moved over to Preservation Plus. So just wanted to note that was a good sign.
Okay, thanks, Anne. Mike?
Secretary Mike Moriarty, I had a tremendous report out on Project 472. However, Representative Trail handled that for me, so I appreciate the assist from the good representative. I did want to talk for a second about Project 466 K99. We talked a lot about that corridor, a lot of what we've heard already today involving shoulders, truck traffic, things of that nature. Talked about the importance of this corridor in terms of safe and efficient flow of people and freight. One thing we talked about in the safety realm, which was interesting, is there's really more than one dimension of safety at play here. We talked about being able to pull over and change a tire on the shoulder, or for an oversized load truck to pass through, but also having the shoulders allows law enforcement to conduct their enforcement duties safely. And that was something that we talked about as a very important feature of this improvement on that corridor.
Great, Mike. Thank you. That makes good sense. I'm glad you raised sort of that additional dimension. Also, Mike, I'm sorry, given that we're having to do the report out this way. Usually Mike serves as our MC at the end of these meetings, and it's usually, a nice balance of good professional with a little bit of fun. So I'm sorry, Mike, that didn't work out this year. You'll be back. All right. I want to recognize, I'm watching the chat as well. And I see that there's been some good conversation around the importance of US 69. We certainly, as I went to the various rooms, certainly heard that loud and clear, and am not at all, I heard that loud and clear, and we are not at all ignoring that feedback. Okay, let's see. Could you scroll up, whoever's running the screen, could you scroll up please to the top, and let's see what else is in the chat box. In the chat, whoa, okay. Okay, so no, let's see. So I see 69, there's conversation around 69, why it's important for trucks. Just 69 to 44, not scored yet not scored this year, but only that last segment piece. All right, I think we've covered 69. Denise, can you take me back to the regular screen? The navigation is getting better every day, I'm sure. Okay, so let's go to the last slide. And so maybe that's Lisa or Denise. All right, okay. So in terms of the next steps, we will take a look at what's in the chat. We will talk with the facilitators. We have, they've captured lots of their comments and they have relayed those on through SurveyMonkey. If you have questions about scores, we'll go back and take a look at the projects where we had scores. I want to give a shout out to Southeast Kansas. 116 folks are still on the call. I appreciate you hanging in there with us. Let's go back to that last slide, please. There we go. All right. So this concludes the Southeast Kansas version of 2021 Local Consult. We have more segments, more episodes to come. We'll be in Wichita remotely tomorrow. You're welcome to join us at any of these. I sincerely mean it. We want to hear you. We are hearing you. You speak, Kdot listens, and together we work. I think we've had a fantastic start to IKE. I look forward to more announcements, both the development pipeline, more construction announcements next year. Thank you very much for your participation. Your input really matters. Please be safe out there. Take care. Bye-bye.